Welcome back. Today we'll learn about psychology at work, IO, and vocational psychology. Psychology is a study of human behavior and mental processes. It's about what you do, what you're thinking and feeling while you do it. So the big question is, well, what do you want to do? Given that you have self-determination and agency, how do you want to spend your life or apply those traits that we're measuring, like cognitive ability or personality, character strengths? The way a lot of people use the word career is as a job at an organization. That's a certain perspective. It's the perspective of IO psychology or management or HR when looking at an employee in an organization. So to management and functions that work for management, like IO psychology, like HR, your career starts when you started working for that organization, and maybe it progresses, moves along, and maybe you climb the ladder. And then it ends when you retire or they fire you or you quit. And then you go on to another career somewhere else. So that perspective has gained currency with employees. And now that represents the lay use of the term career. But that's not the way that vocational psychologists or career counselors. Career counseling is the applied arm of vocational psychology. Vocational psychology is the scholarship of individual career, and career counseling is its applied practice. Anyway, that's not the way they use the word career. They look at career from the individual's perspective. So IO psychologists and vocational psychologists both study work, but from different perspectives. IO psychologists are typically management consultants, and that ask questions like, what individual is the right fit for the job at this organization out of the candidates who applied for this job? And how do we define the job? What knowledge, skills, abilities, other attributes does somebody need in order to have that job? What tests should we give them to find out how to rank them? And which is the one that we should choose? And then they also do some work related to people in organizations. So they might help develop leaders. They might look at work-life balance or how you design a job to work for a person. Okay, they're the highest earning psychologists of all the different types of psychologists. They have their strengths and limitations. My impression of that field is it's not very strong on EDIA because it answers to management, and so it's not very aware of issues around class privilege. But all fields of psychology have their strengths and their limitations. It's not alone in the way. They tend not to register as psychologists. The term psychologist is a registered designation, but the body that registers psychologists heavily represents the interests of clinical psychologists and maybe educational psychologists, but other types of psychologists have broken off. And that has happened with IO psychology, and IO psychologists, and they tend to use the word consultant instead of psychologist. They might refer to themselves as psychologists informally, but they wouldn't do that formally, because then you could get a cease and desist letter from the College of Psychologists. Vocational, sorry, I'm losing my voice. I have to be a lecture. I also lost my water bottle. So vocational psychologists and career counselors focus on the individuals, and they might ask what job or organization would be the right fit for this individual. And they really get to know a person. We get to know their story, get to know about their traumas, about their talents. And they might study how people define themselves. They might look at career life design, personal career development, and they'll help people get around the selection systems that the IO psychologists work so hard to develop and test. Because 75 or 80% of people don't get their jobs from a job posting. They get it informally through back channels, through networking. So they help people with how to do that. And they answer to individual clients, and the discipline as a whole, since it has historically and started with, say, working with immigrants to help them find work, does have a better understanding of issues around social marginalization. It actually has quite a strong social justice flavor. So there's a sense of mission of decent work for all. So IO psychologists might be interested in peak performance for an individual. How can you coach a leader and develop them till they're at a point of peak performance? Whereas vocational psychologists would think, what is the global situation for work, right? Where was this made? And what was that like for the people working there? What kind of conditions do they have? And many of the people in the world don't have decent work. They don't have safe working conditions. They don't have access to medical care. They don't have enough access to education, and they're not paid fairly. So it's more about bringing the bottom up. But if you can work with even people who are very socially privileged, work with career counselors. There are career counselors who specialize in working with post-secondary students. You'll find them at the Student Services Center. The field of vocational psychology was founded by Frank Parsons. Frank Parsons was not a psychologist. He was a lawyer who became a civil engineer. So he was interested in systems and how to make them work better. And he noticed that people, particularly recent immigrants, were struggling with poverty. He wondered, what could we do to help? And he thought that helping people, the way to do it was to help find out what people's aptitudes and talents are. That relates to a concept of vocation. You know, what should you go do? Well, help guide people to find that and help train them at being good at it. And maybe that's how to address the immigration issue. Other psychologists who were studying IQ testing had different ideas. They would say, no, don't let those people in at all. They have low intelligence. That's why they'll struggle. So he had a different approach to that. And he thought that as a principle, people should select the line of work to which their nature was most adapted. The calling to which your aptitudes, capacities, interests, and ambitions best adapt you. Maybe somehow all these things about you line up and would align with something he's calling vocation. And he said that efficiency and success are largely dependent on adaptation. You should learn what you're best adapted to do and get started in that line. He thought that that vocational guidance services could be scientifically developed. You could use scientific instruments. And he thought that these services should be available to everyone early in life in public schools. That is why your school had a guidance counselor. And that led to the discipline of counseling psychology. Vocational psychology is the original form of counseling psychology, but counseling psychology has now branched off into many other different directions. So now we would say that vocational psychology is a sub-discipline of counseling psychology. So assuming the perspective of organizational management on your own career as an individual isn't very adaptive, I'd say it's maladaptive, right? They're not management perspectives were never meant for the individual, right? They privilege management, that's what they're for. So let's think about what career means to you as an individual. It includes, but is more than the work role. It's actually the sum of all your public occupations. Occupation is what you do. Some of all your public social roles over your life course. So maybe you're a student, a daughter, a sister, a volunteer, a dancer, a hijabi. Those are all social roles. And your career, which is the constellation of these roles over your life course, transcends any particular job or organization. When you lose your job, your career isn't over. And your career is happening now. Right now, you're in the student role, and I'm in the teacher role. And these are social roles that come with social scripts. So what I'm wearing now is a costume. This is a theater. I'm performing a role. You're my audience, but you're also characters with roles. These are all props. And that's same as like a hospital. Find different kind of characters there doing different things, different props. The home is also a theater. These are all different theaters where you have social roles, and those roles come with expectations. You all have an idea of what a good parent is like, of what a good teacher is like, of what a good friend is like. And though carrying out those roles gives us meaning and purpose. Donald Super described these as a rainbow. Okay, so imagine all of your different roles as the bands of a rainbow. The work role is just one of those bands. And the work role itself for you will include many different jobs, will include paid employment, and it'll include unpaid work. Now, the rainbow, Donald Super started off by identifying 9 roles that he thought that most people in our society fulfill at some point in their life course. And they are homemaker, spouse, parent, worker, citizen, leisureite, student, and child. But there are other roles beyond that. Patient is a social role that some of you may have. Prisoner is a social role. You don't get to choose it. What else is there? Religious adherents. Those are all social roles. And some of these may never apply to you. You may never be a spouse. And this is a lifespan view. According to his theory, there's different stages for career. So when you're a child, you're in the child role. When you're young, that's pretty much all you do. But as long as you have parents, you'll still be their child. So the way that looks will change. But generally speaking, there's a period under which other people are mentoring you and guiding you, and you're growing. And then there's that period that many of you are in now where you're reaching out and exploring. You're trying different things. And then when you're around my age, you kind of like figure it out and then really apply yourself to doing something to be very generative and productive. And then there's a time to slow down and pass on the mantle. So in your assignment, I can't ask you to draw out this whole rainbow because you don't know what that story looks like yet. Right? You can only produce that at the end. So what I've asked you to do instead is just tell me about the roles that you're managing right now. And I expect that you'll need to adapt the 9 that I put there from Donald Super, because that's a starting point. Right? They may not work for you. And I'm sure you have other ones. This is what your the rainbow looked like in his original 1980 paper. You can see how some roles will start later in life. Right? And leisureite is one. Leisure refers to time for play, things you do for fun, something that you might do when you're young, and then again when you're very old without much time for it in the middle. And we've already discussed the arc of the rainbow, but it harkens to Erikson's stages of psychosocial development as well. But Erickson's stages refer to all kinds of different social roles. No, they both do. I'm sorry, I'll take that back. Okay, they both, Super's idea of career and Erickson's idea of psychosocial development both consider all the social roles that you take in your life course, so not just about work. So for your assignment, you can tell me about the social roles that you're managing right now. And you're not going to have that arc perspective because you don't have the long view right yet, right? You haven't lived your life yet, you're just starting. Are there any questions about the career life rainbow for the assignment? Yes.
Do we need to fill in all 9? Like
No,
9?
I needed to start somewhere and I put those in, but you can delete them if they're not relevant to you. Most people only focus on 2 or 3 roles at a time. And maybe you'll get 9 over your entire lifespan. I can tell you that I'm certainly, I don't have any time for leisure right now. Be like teacher, parent, homemaker, and my house is a mess. That's about as much as I can do. So 3, yeah, would be fine. But what I don't want to do is have you keep what's there and be like, not applicable, because then that would show me that you hadn't thought about it. So work is one of the roles. The work role broadly in your life, across your life, is going to be way more than a single job. And it's not just going to be things that you're paid for, right? It'll include jobs that you're paid for, but parenting is also work. So is caregiving. We'll do volunteer work. So you might wonder, what is work? Work refers to purposeful activity that is directed at producing a valued good or service. So the activity isn't just for the sake of the activity itself. That's play. Sometimes you do something because you love doing it. That's not the point of work. Work is activity that's about producing something valued, a good or a service. An employment relationship occurs when somebody pays you to do work for them. And the relationship is defined by a contract. And they'll likely have you do a particular job. And a job refers to a task or a position in an organization that is defined by a scope of tasks. So very simplistically, a job is a task. But when we talk about jobs in organizations, there's a title and you have a scope of tasks. There's a few things you can do. And then other things are outside the scope of your responsibility. IO psychologists do job analyses where they carefully observe people at their job, trying to understand what they're doing, so they can define the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other attributes that are associated with each job. Knowledge refers to the range of one's understanding or information. In this class, you are learning knowledge. If you can drive a car, that's based on your knowledge of the rules of the road that you read in the driver's manual. Ability refers to your existing competence to perform some physical or mental act. And abilities can be quite basic. You have the ability to see and the ability to hear. A very highly developed ability is a skill, and skills require more intentional training and practice and investment. Abilities are assumed to be innate, but when I say assumed, I mean assumed by managers. A manager thinks that people coming to the job have an innate ability to read. That's not the way your mother or your elementary school teacher felt about it. There was a lot of training and practice from their perspective. Now, I am able to drive. I have a driver's license. I can make it from point A to point B, but none of my passengers would describe me as a skilled driver. skill, the concept of skill has a higher standard, okay? Your proficiency means having a high degree of competence or expertise. And then they look for other attributes. Sometimes these are called soft skills. Employers might be looking for somebody who has a certain kind of personality, who expresses certain values, who would be a fit for the organization's culture, who would get along well with others. Those are other attributes. So that was work. What about fun? Play refers to doing an activity for the pleasure of it, for its own sake, for the cause of your own pleasure or satisfaction. You play freely, spontaneously, because you like or value doing that thing. You like it or it's meaningful to you. And so play activities are activities as an end in themselves, not as a means to an end. But work is about a means to an end, producing something, some valued good or service. That said, play does offer lots of social benefits. So it keeps people out of trouble, it helps sublimate aggressive instincts, supports individual or community development, promotes physical and mental health, reduces costs related to physical and mental illness. Okay, let's fund people to play. When you're playing for the sake of a socially valued outcome, like for the sake of your health, then that's recreation. And governments fund recreation programs. If your play produces an object of economic value, that's a hobby. And play, since it's about activity for the sake of the activity itself, called avocation, because it calls you away from your work. Vocation is a historically religious concept that was adopted into modern psychology and secularized. And I was reading a paper on calling, and I thought, oh, this is sort of a messy concept, and I don't quite understand it. And I didn't really understand it until I realized it was a religious concept that they were trying to secularize. Vocation has a Catholic history and calling has a Protestant history, but they basically mean the same thing. And it's the idea that there's some intersection between your gifts, right, and the deepest needs of the world. And maybe you should find that place and use your gifts, and doing so will leave the world a better place. That's the idea of vocation, and people feel a strong urge to go do that. So according to Hall and Chandler, calling refers to the work that you perceive as your purpose in life. But this work is kind of work is unique to the individual, fits with their talents, person feels passionate about it, feel an urgency to do it. It's meaningful, but that meaning is subjective and self-relevant, might not make sense to anyone else. That's part of your personal and professional whole person. People believe that that doing this will contribute to making the world a better place. So it's about service, ideally, and it follows some process of discernment. Might not be that easy to figure out what it is. And that discernment would involve introspection, listening to yourself, talking to other people, trying out different things. And doing this should lead to some sense of fulfillment. So employees who have a sense of calling have higher life and job satisfaction and lower absenteeism. That said, reading this paper and their definition of calling doesn't completely map onto a religious sense of calling, because these are different perspectives. So what's a talent then? Talent is a very highly developed skill. Talents are originally an ancient measure of very great value, form of currency. And I wanted to find out, well, how much was a talent worth in today's dollars? And that's a hard question to answer because it depended on the time and the place in the ancient world. But wherever that was, it was worth a very, very great deal. So in ancient Greece, it was 26 kilograms of silver, but they didn't have the industrial mining capacities we had today. So one talent was worth a lot. So, easily over $1 million. And that's opposite to the modern use of the term to refer to a highly developed skill, because their skills are what we trade for pay in the marketplace. It's also a basis for belonging in community. It was the World Health Organization development, a definition of well-being, being able to cope with life and contribute your skills to your community. This is very important. The skills are more readily acquired and developed, and to a higher degree by those who have an aptitude for them. An aptitude refers to the capacity to acquire a skill through practice. So you can read to your cat every night, but you'll never acquire the ability to read or understand language because cats don't have an aptitude for language. It's just never going to work. A certain child might have an aptitude for, say, writing, and that child might benefit way more from writing lessons than the average child. And skills that are highly developed to the point that they make a person stand out, that they're remarkable, are talents. And given the resources, opportunity, and interests, maybe that child could one day become a talented novelist. The take-home point is that developing a gift into a talent requires investment, intentional investment. If you ignore or neglect a gift, then it won't develop into a talent. Here's an old story, call it a cultural narrative about talent. And in this story, there's a man who has several servants. This is a very long time ago. There's no HR department, and this would definitely not be okay today, but here's how the story goes. So he's going to go off on a journey, and he gives one of the servants 5 talents, and another one of them 2 talents, and another one is given 1 talent. Okay, and then he left. And he came back and he wanted the talents back. And so one of them who had 5 came back with another 5. And this master employer boss was pleased. Okay, he was very happy about this. And then the one that received 2 talents came and said, look, you gave me 2 and I got another 2, here's 4. He's very pleased with that. But then the one that was given the 1 talent said, well, I was afraid, so I went and I buried it. I hid it. Here you go. Here's the talent back. I buried it. And the boss is very, very angry about this. Okay. And he says, thou wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I do not sow, and I gather where I have not strawed, but a judgmental person. Okay, and so he's upset that that the servant didn't go and invest the 1 talent. So this story takes a very hard line on the expectation that while gifts may be or are distributed unequally, one's responsible for developing what one has been given. You've all been given something. For some of you, it's 5 or something. For others, it's 1. But you've all been given something. And aptitudes and talents have a strong genetic basis, but nurturing an aptitude into a talent requires the investment of resources. And that's not just your own will, right? It could be from parents, from teachers. And a person who has an aptitude will get more mileage out of investing their resources in that aptitude. So go invest in your gifts, and then they grow into talents. And then investing in your talents leads you to reap more good things. So for unto everyone that hath, more shall be given, and you'll have abundance. The parable of the talents frames bearing a talent, failing to invest it in the world as a slothful, imprudent, wasteful, wicked insult against its bestower, and a cause for weeping and gnashing of teeth. Career is the journey that's the result of developing talents, of following a sense of vocation through your social roles that include but are not limited to the work role, which itself includes but is not limited to a particular job. The word career comes from the French carrière, meaning a road or a race course. That French word comes from the Latin via carrera, referring to a track or a carriage. So it's about a path. Career is the course of one's public life. The verb to career means to move swiftly in a specified direction. To be in full career is to have your life going at full speed. So career is a path, about a path and motion along a path. Career development is about the process up the path, movement along that journey. And that movement isn't linear. We often assume it is, but that's a myth itself. Right? There's periods of change, periods of stability, sudden shocks and transitions, like when people get laid off or have an injury or an accident. It's like a zigzag path that can loop back and around. So that's career development. It's a lifelong process of how you blend and manage paid and unpaid activities, learning, work, leisure time, everything. So it's a juggling act. Career development requires adaptability. So there will be multiple transitions. Career is also a story. It's a narrative. It's a story about a journey. It's a story about who you are, what you've done, what obstacles you've overcome, what you can offer. Stories, narratives, are partly true and partly false. So if I write there's a bio in the syllabus about who I am, and it's about like half a page, and there's no way I could put everything in there. And I didn't put all my professional failures in there. I dropped that information. So it was very selective. So I brought forward some themes, the ones I thought were most useful for you to know. But sometimes people say things about themselves that aren't literally true. That's not so much the point, because it's the adaptive value of a story is about its power to advise your next action. So a better question to a counselor than is this story true or false, is what are you going to do with that story? And sometimes people have stories about themselves that are maladaptive, that make them feel like they can't do anything, and they're no good at anything. That'd be a maladaptive narrative. So one thing that career counselors do is help people tell better stories about themselves. And that story is ultimately socially constructed between an individual and an audience. Stories have actors. They're actors because they make actions in some environment. That's the theater. Actors have characters. They have their personalities, their skills, their virtues and vices. They act in roles. They're on some kind of a quest, and they're loosely following a script. Stories have themes, and they reflect values. There's a moral of the story. We started this course off with a story. the story of psyche. So psychology is the study of the psyche. And as you may recall, psyche means mind or soul. And once upon a time, it meant soul. Psyche is the ancient Greek and Roman goddess of the soul. But in the late 19th century, Wilhelm Wundt, who was the first psychologist, redefined the subject as the consciousness and founded the modern discipline of psychology. And so now psyche means mind, but then also the unconscious mind and everything else. So it's still kind of a vague term, and you can understand the confusion around what it means when you think, oh, it originally meant soul. So in the ancient myth, psyche went on a long journey, one that was full of suffering and humiliation. And even though the trials she was given seemed impossible, she passed through them all by demonstrating adaptability. She used her resources, which she found outside herself and her relationships, to respond to challenges prudently. She listened to the wise counsel of her allies, and she allowed them to help. But fortunately, she had capable allies. Adaptability is about your readiness to use your resources to respond to challenges in ways that achieve the desired results. It's like the concept of intelligence, but I like it a little more because it isn't limited to specific cognitive abilities and knowledge. It includes that and all your personal resources, like your personality, your character strengths, and your skills. It even includes your social resources, right? Like the counsel of your friends and their helping hands. It includes resources in your community, like the ones that you have through traditions and stories and myths that have been handed down over the ages. So resources matter, they do, but it isn't all about resources. Success in an endeavor ultimately comes down to what you do. And even if you have very few resources, you can go far if you use them well. But you can have many, many resources and squander or misuse them. So solving problems and achieving goals depends on prudent action. Success, which I think should apply to endeavors and not to people, is an outcome of adaptability. And so is resilience. Adaptability is the skill that produces success in endeavors and allows us to succeed in a wide range of environments. It's the human superpower. So humans are among the most adaptable species, along with like ants and grass and dandelions and tardigrades. It's kind of cute. That's like a water bug of some kind that's microscopic. Anyway, think of how dandelions adapt to lawnmowers. It's kind of impressive. Humans too have adapted to a lot of different environments. Resilience is a popular construct that we hear about a lot. Sometimes we predict, we think, given what we know about people and their circumstances and their barriers and how thorny the problems are, sometimes we predict that they're going to fail, that they're not going to make it. Okay, those young addicts on the street are never going to make it. But sometimes they do. And those resilient individuals are the outliers. They're the error in our model of how the world works. So you can't actually measure resilience at the population level. Because if I give you a measure of resilience that assumes it's some kind of a trait, well, then that's not compatible with the idea that it's about error in some kind of prediction. You will find psychometric tests for resilience. If you read the questions, they're all about adaptability. Okay, so resilience should be assigned post hoc after the fact, after our expectations are proven wrong. And if we interview resilient people, what we learn is that sometimes they just got lucky, but more often they were somehow able to draw on their resources. Maybe they had some unexpected reserve, one that we didn't know about, to respond to a challenge adaptively, and thereby achieve the desirable result. So resilience is an outcome of adaptability, and we can measure adaptability at the population level with psychometrically sound instruments. And it doesn't come with the baggage that IQ testing comes with. I think IQ testing has its place. It does measure certain cognitive abilities very, very well. But I think adaptability in many ways better reflects the philosophical construct of intelligence. There's a place for celebrating personal resilience, but if we're talking about disabling circumstances or environments, then I think we should also ask about social responsibility for addressing those circumstances. I don't consider it ethical to expect resilience of people. Prudence is the classical virtue that leads us to discern our true good in every circumstance and choose the right means of achieving it. Gets at the idea of adaptable responding. Our species is known as Homo sapiens. That means wise human. What is the difference between prudence and wisdom? They're very similar, but wisdom is more cognitive. It's about your knowledge and experience that you use towards prudent action. You can be wise and still do something imprudent. And prudence is more about the practical action. So it's conative instead of cognitive. I'll write that down. It's about what you do. Conative, based on doing, versus cognitive, which is based on thinking or knowing. The story of Psyche has one of the few happy endings in classical mythology. It ends with this wedding banquet, which represents the triumph of ideals, of values. And in this story, it's order, and kind of a paternalistic order, where Zeus sits at the head of the table and everyone else is in their place. And they're all doing what they're supposed to do. So what is it? The muses are playing the music, and Vulcan is using fire to cook the food, and Dionysus is serving the wine. You get the idea. So they're all acting out their vocations as ancient Greek gods on Mount Olympus. Eros and Psyche live happily ever after, and they have a daughter named Hedone, and that means pleasure, enjoyment, and delight. Hedonic theories of well-being offer that you should only have positive emotions and not have negative emotions. That's hedonic moral philosophy. The idea in this story is that pleasure is secondary to and a result of doing the right thing, of satisfying ideals, of pursuing values, and of a reward, but not an end in itself. Well-being simply means prudential values. What is good for you? That depends on what you think is good. Those are your values, and they're different for different people. And the question of what good is like a big question of moral philosophy. The World Health Organization definition of mental health, that's a state of well-being in which you realize your abilities, you know what they are, you can realize them, you can act on them, make them real. You can cope with the normal stresses of life, you can work productively, and make a contribution to your community. And it's interestingly lacking in feelings of pleasure or even of satisfaction. And it's quite utilitarian in defining well-being as socially adaptive behavior. So in this understanding, having mental health kind of means that you're sure of your talents. You can apply them to contribute to your community. You have the skills to navigate challenges that you'll inevitably encounter along the way. Okay? And it doesn't mean the absence of mental illness or sickness or suffering or pain. Okay? Happiness is a construct that we struggle to define it at all. And historically, it refers to fortunate happenstance, to luck, to being favored. But it's not required by this definition of mental health. Psyche is a classically feminine, that is submissive heroine, because that's what masculinity and femininity meant to the ancient Greeks and Romans. Masculinity is agentic and dominant, and femininity is reactive and submissive. That's the way they saw it, but that's not the way that other cultures have conceptualized it, if they even have made those distinctions. So Psyche gets through her trials passively, with help from others, with grace. And so what's grace? It essentially means help from outside yourself. So sometimes in life you feel like you're this big and the challenge you're encountering is that big. And well, grace is everything outside of you that makes up the difference that allows you to rise to meet that challenge, or brings the challenge down to your size. Okay. And there's a place for that. Like often you feel alone, but you're not. You live in community and other people have been through the same kinds of trials and they can give you advice, and perspective, and support. There's always a place for that. Carl Jung, who's an analytical psychologist, offers a more masculine archetype of the hero, more agentic, more empowered, more confrontational. So stories have characters, and Jung studied many myths and narratives from around the world, and he concluded that there were 12 kinds of characters that showed up. I don't know if he's right or not, but that's what he concluded. The archetype that is relevant to career is that of the hero. The hero leaves his or her mark on the world through mastery of some skill. So your career is about leaving your mark on the world, demonstrating mastery of a skill, and often showing courage to navigate difficulties. So you have to be the hero of your own story. That archetype's masculine is about agency and initiative and courage. And so is that idea of leaving your mark on things, like a tomcat. So what does a hero story look like? Joseph Campbell studied stories about heroes, and he thought that hero myths all followed a certain basic pattern. He called that a monomyth. And by the way, these ideas can be criticized. There are people who will call the BS on Jung and on Campbell. But on with it. So according to Campbell, the hero's journey starts with the status quo, the way things were in the world that you know. But then there's some disruption and something happens. And you have some call to a journey, to a quest. Right? So somehow that journey from the known into the unknown, from what's safe into what's scary, starts. Career is a journey. So hearing some call, you break away from home and from what's normal and what's comfortable, and you start following your path, finding your way through the unknown. And it's overwhelming and scary. And there are trials and tribulations and perils and enemies. But along your journey, as scared and as alone as you may feel, you actually will find that you have mentors, guides, helpers, allies, friends, even from the beginning. Some you meet and make along the way. And maybe when you were at your worst, and when you slipped, there was somebody that carried you. It all comes to a climax, a crisis. There's some really big test, some major act of overcoming, right? You fight the big boss, the dragon, the demon. You have to confront the dragon head on. You can't avoid it. So the Jungian hero is the person that, say, battles an addiction and is not consumed by it, but overcomes it. And you wrote that strength does not come to you in a place of crisis if you haven't done the inner work first. And then all those trials, all that suffering, all that pain comes to make you learn and grow. Kind of like a purification, crystallization through fire. Okay? It's through your trials, through your suffering, that you hone your strength and discover your gifts and find your values. It's how you develop your superpowers and find your treasures. But the journey changes you. At the end of it, you're not the same. You've developed. There's some transformation. And at the end of the story, the hero returns to the point of origin and bears witness. So now that you've been through all that, you're not the same anymore. You don't see things the same way, but you might see them more clearly. You've come out of the unknown. You've learned a lot, walking a little taller now. Maybe you've changed something. Maybe you've come to see others with more compassion. So maybe after you overcome your own addiction, you don't see your addicted parents the way you did when you were a child. But you might see them differently, maybe even with more compassion. And now you get to help someone else on their journey. And all this refers to Jung's ideas about individuation. It's about how you complete your journey as individual and find yourself. If you pull it off, you could look back and say, well, you know, that sucked and it was scary, but it was worth it. For linking this to Erikson, who is also a psychodynamic personality theorist, once you've completed your whole life journey, it could consist of many of these cycles. You do that in good faith, address those conflicts, then you'll achieve some kind of integrity of self and find wisdom. And now you can be the mayor of the Shire and write the story down in the Red Book. Suffering and even trauma has a place in self-development and in career development. People's work careers, ones that they can be very passionate about, often have something to do with personal trauma. So private preoccupation, just trauma, can become public occupation. So Mark Savakis is a famous career counseling scholar, and in his professional opinions, thinks most people's callings are somehow rooted in personal trauma. So something bad happens to you, and now you need to understand it, go out into the unknown and figure it out, help other people avoid the same fate, address the system, make things better. And that can be part of a process of healing by transcending. Yes. There are people who have worked very hard to make things better for survivors of, say, sexual violence, and who've gone and done the lobbying to change laws, to get programs in place. And often those are people who had something happen to them. That said, it's not a necessary course of action. So people who have undergone a traumatic experience aren't responsible for fixing things. They may have another way of coping, and that's perfectly acceptable. Okay. But often people want to and have a drive to, and they can find meaning and satisfaction in doing so. So trauma can be a positive motivating force and one that leads people to drive constructive change. But that doesn't mean that anything you do to try to make things better is the right thing to do. People can feel driven to do something. They can find doing something very meaningful, and it still might not be the best thing to do, right? Those are kind of different games in a way. Anyone know who's in the picture there? I did my master's research, or some of it anyway, on the relationship between bullying and suicide. And one of the names in that database, we had like over 120 names, was Jaden Bell. He was a high school student who unfortunately committed suicide related to bullying and cyberbullying. And that's his father. And his father wanted to raise awareness about bullying. And he felt called to walk across the country. And he walked along many paths and along highways. And walking along a highway is a dangerous thing to do. And he was struck by a vehicle. Now, that doesn't mean that it was all for nothing. I mean, I think there's a film about his life now, and it probably did function to raise awareness. But if you were his career counselor and he said that he felt called to do that, you might maybe talk to him about different ways he could raise awareness, or maybe you could go from city to city and then walk through the city with people, but not walk along the highway. My point in sharing this is to say that just because you feel called to do something and it's deeply meaningful doesn't make it the right thing to do. I'm not trying to knock it. So whatever terrain you choose to navigate through, there's going to be dragons that you need to confront and obstacles to work your way around. And what I've done here is present an elaborated version of the chariot metaphor of career. So you're the charioteer. You're in the driver's seat. You're the actor. And you have resources, you have interests, and you'll encounter troubles along the way. They're inevitable. And you're on a rainbow path of all your social roles. And usually it's only about 2 or 3 at a time. You have some agency to choose your environments. And assuming that you have the freedom to do so, your ancestors 300 years ago were just peasants. Your mom and your dad's peasants, you'll be a peasant. But nowadays, you have much more self-determination. So assuming we have the freedom to do so, people like to do what they're interested in. Interests are motivations to engage in certain activities. There's some things that you want to do. Some people are interested in crafts. Some people are interested in science. Some people are interested in mechanics. John Holland thought that people's occupational preferences were an expression of their character. And he came up with a model of a vocational choice. So he had a theory of vocational personalities and work environments. He thought that there are certain types of personalities, and they seek out and flourish in environments where they fit. So his idea was person, environment, fit. And his work led to the RIASEC test, the Holland model of vocational interests. And according to that model, there are 6 major categories of vocational interests. So some people are interested in working with their hands, with concrete things. So somebody that would be interested in looking at a car engine and taking it apart would have a realistic interest. Might like to work in construction, landscaping. It might be a baker of artisanal bread. But the point is, they want to work with concrete objects. Some people are more about working with their heads. And I imagine that when you took the test that's associated with this model, many of you had an eye in there. Because you're following some motivation to come to university and read books and listen to lectures and think about things and write papers. Those are investigative interests. Then some people are creative, right? They like to express their emotion and their intuition through artistic pursuits. That doesn't just mean painting. Right? Gardening is also artistic. So is graphic design. Then some people really like helping others. They enjoy being in some kind of interpersonal relationship. So those are social interests. Teaching and nursing, counseling are all classic social interests. Some people like persuading and leading, right, and influencing. Those are enterprising interests. Then some people like to organize. They like doing the paperwork and crossing all their T's and dotting their I's and filing things. Those are conventional interests. They may also enjoy working with numbers. The PSYC test, which is on your assignment, asks you questions about activities and asks you whether you would like or dislike doing that activity. This is not a question about skills or abilities. Had a different test for those on the Alberta ALIS website. Just because you have a skill doesn't mean you want to use it in your career. So I have the skill of, turning over small objects in my hand, but that might not want to be one that I want to use. And when I went roller skating and didn't wear any wrist guards, I noticed that I had previously had that skill, but I was still able to do my work. I didn't need to go on leave because of that. Interests are about what you like doing. You're drawn to engage in that. So some of you might like helping people who have issues with drugs or alcohol, and some of you might be like, no, I don't want to do that. Just like you might have no interest in laying carpet. So this is not a test of skill or talent. And maybe we don't need IQ tests to decide who can do what in society. Maybe people already know what they want to do. And so another approach is to help people to get the training to do that well. And that would be Frank Parsons kind of style. Once you get the test, you'll get a code. Your code is based on your top 3 scores. So this was mine, and so it would classify me as SIA. Yes, SIA. But you can see here that the I and the A are so close together that, and what does that mean? And don't forget, these tests are not that reliable. You could take the test twice, think about the questions a different way, and come up with slightly different scores. So we're not going to get too hung up on the exact order of these 3 letters. IO psychologists who do job analyses have a big book of all the jobs. Just like the clinical psychologists have the big book of all the mental illnesses, and the positive psychologists have the big book of all the character strengths. The IO psychologists have a big book of all the jobs. And once upon a time, that was the dictionary of occupational titles, and it would describe what the job is and what kind of knowledge, skills, and abilities are associated with it. This went online in the 1990s as ONET. And now ONET gives you even more information. It'll tell you what the market prospects are for different types of jobs. You can plug in your code, and then it will give you a list of jobs associated with that code and with similar codes, because we're not going to get too hung up on the order of those letters, given the unreliability of the instrument. How did that go for you? Did those look like things you wanted to do? Yes.
No, I didn't agree with that. And like one.
Okay. One, and the rest of them were just like, nope.
No, like I don't see myself in most of them.
This is the best test that we have. It sucked. Oh no. Well, you can learn about the unreliability and, in your case, invalidity of psychometric instruments. An interest refers to an activity that you want to engage in. And that kind of engagement is about passion. Being fully engaged in an activity can put you in a flow state where you lose your sense of time and place. You're so into what you're doing. That's in your textbook in the appendix on IO psychology. And this all seems so desirable that some people think there's a view out there, a belief that you must find and do your passion or else. Choose a job you love and you will never have to work a day in your life is a popular motivational quotation that's misattributed to Confucius. He never actually said that. And Steve Jobs reflected this theme in a commencement address that he gave to Stanford undergraduates, where he exhorted them to go and find and relentlessly pursue their passion. He said, you've got to find what you love. Your work will fill a large part of your life. And the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. And if you haven't found it yet, keep looking, don't settle. And you might encounter sort of do what you love career advising. And it's this idea that you have some loved activity and you should find it and pursue it at all costs. That's really a cultural myth, right? The idea that you have a predetermined passion you need to discover after hunting for it like an Easter egg in the bushes. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking. In reality, passion is about engagement. And you can try something you don't like, become interested in it, and then start to feel passionately about it. You'll probably have more than one passion in your life. Okay. You might even have several at a time. They develop with exploration and experience. You could go try something, see if you like it. That might develop into a passion. The idea that you should pursue passion at all costs assumes a lot of class privilege. I'm not surprised that someone like Steve Jobs would say it at a Stanford commencement, because that assumes a lot of resources. That assumes that maybe someone else is paying for you to live somewhere while you go and figure out what that is and do it, and do unpaid internships in creative fields, right? There are people who have less money can't do that. They have to go right to work, and maybe they have to work at jobs that they don't like. Pursuing, say, a creative passion through the work role might not be prudent. Right? There might not be a labor market for your passionate activity. There are many people who pursue a passion and then, don't make it in, say, the theater or as singers. Okay. Any job is more than a single activity. And even if you like or love something about a job or a work role, you won't love everything. So you might love teaching. There's still some things you would hate about being a teacher. And there are many other good reasons to choose a job, because it pays the bills. And so the passion narrative devalues all these other reasons for choosing jobs. And if you have a passion, you can also pursue that outside the work role, assuming that you have the leisure time to do that. Passion is an interesting term. If you look it up in the dictionary, it's a noun, and it means to suffer. It's a reactive state. If I cast this pen across the table, that pen is undergoing a passion. Okay. It's a state of being moved by something external. It can be a reaction to an internal emotion, your emotions or passions, but they're not really something that need to be chosen or found, because it's a reactive state. Okay, it doesn't require any direction or decision on the part of the subject. And the influence of that external state can be overwhelming, and it could be a very unpleasant thing. So illnesses are called passions. So you don't really need to choose or pursue a passion. Passion takes you. Right? So engagement is something that can be chosen by an individual or elicited by the environment. And engagement is really what we mean by the term passion. And engaging in something, some activity or some feeling, may or may not be adaptive. So for a charioteer, passion would be the thrill of the journey, wherever it's going, even if that's sometimes over hurdles and in circles. So passion is found in fully engaging with and being moved by whatever it is that you're going through. And passion isn't purpose, and it isn't necessarily pleasurable. It's often not. Your compass along your journey, right, through the environments that you choose, and in dealing with obstacles and confronting problems, are your values, not your passions. So a value is something you think is good, important, meaningful. So honesty is a value. Community is a value. Efficiency is a value. And it can be difficult to discern your values because you'll be raised by people, by teachers, by family members who tell you what you should value. Sometimes it can take a while for you to sort out what your own authentic values are. And a good sign that something isn't really an authentic value is if you're doing something because you think you should be doing it, but you feel kind of torn up inside about it. Your authentic values will really resonate with you. And person-environment fit depends on values alignment. If you engage in an organizational culture that doesn't align with your values, the values of an organization often reflects the values of the leader, and that leads to burnout. So for this to work, your compass must be true, right? You must know your values, and then also, to the best of your ability, be faithful to them. Okay, and your values allow you to discern what to do from moment to moment when you don't have all the information, all the knowledge, or the big picture. So how do you know what your values really are? Well, some of you already know. I'd say at this point in my life, I know what they are. But there are values tests, like there are lists or card sort activities like this one that you could do with a counselor. I gave you a link to an online one, but these are all tools, and ultimately you are the authority on your values. So there'll be many people who will tell you what they should be because they're what they value. The Romans distinguished two kinds of strength. Vis, that's physical force, and virtus, or moral force. And so the concept of strength can refer to what you're good at or how you're good. And the former sense refers to strengths as highly developed skills or talents. And the latter to strengths of character that represent the habitual enactment of your values in a socially desirable way. Those are called virtues. There's always a social context to this idea of strengths and weaknesses, right? Because the value of a skill or a talent is determined within some social context. Okay, so empathy is considered a strength for nurses, but I hear there's some very good military research that shows that it impairs job performance in snipers. In that case, you might refer to it as hesitation or disobedience. So virtues are values that are practiced as actions to the point that they become characteristic habits. And they're valued because they're supposed to contribute to a good life for yourself and others. And the positive psychologists have a handbook of character strengths and virtues. And there's a test for that, which you've taken on your assignment. That's the VIA character strength surveys.
Virtues are habits that are practiced, that can be lost if neglected. So you may have the value of kindness, but if you never practice it, then you don't have the virtue of kindness. Character strengths entered modern psychology with the Character Strengths and Virtues Handbook, the CSV, which was positive psychology's humanistic and strengths-based answer to the disease and deficit-based diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders. It's the DSM that's used in clinical psychology. So if the DSM is psychology's classification system of mental illness, of what is sick and weak and wrong with people, then the CSV is psychology's comparatively much less consulted and developed classification system of what is sane, strong, and right with people, of mental health. Peterson and Seligman consider that strength congruent activity is a route to a psychological good life. The CSV identifies 24 strengths that are organized into 6 virtues. For example, under the virtue of courage, there are 4 strengths. Zest, which refers to energy and enthusiasm, and I think they might be getting at the concept of virility here, minus the sexual connotations, along with bravery, honesty. You can't be courageous if you're lying or you're pretending there isn't a problem, and perseverance. Right? It takes a lot of perseverance to stand up to something. What the CSV will do is give you a inventory of your 5 greatest strengths, your signature strengths, and I'll tell you which ones you score on the middle on, and then I'll give you your 5 lesser strengths, which are ones that you might want to work on. And keep in mind that this is positive psychology, so they can't say weakness, and they say lesser strength instead. A limitation of the CSV is that of the entire field of positive psychology. It assumes that certain traits or states or behaviors are positive without any sense of social context. So you could ask yourself, are the virtues listed in the CSV always good? Are they inherently good in and of themselves? Well, what about gratitude? Is gratitude always good? Victims of abuse may have feelings of gratitude for their abusers. Is that good? Right? Bullies who make cruel jokes have a sense of humor. A prudent sailor can be a pirate. Imps have great teamwork. Curious youth can put themselves in harm's way. Leaders can be toxic. The charlatan has talents. The wicked can be clever. And in fact, their cleverness could make them capable of even greater wickedness. And in these examples of maleficence and misfortune, a virtue is being applied towards an end that's destructive of something socially valued, be that person, property, or the social contract. Here's what I think is the missing piece. The assessment that an action is good is external and not inherent to the behavior. I think the terms adaptive and maladaptive are more useful than words like positive and negative when evaluating behavior or mental states or behaviors that we would call virtues or vices. The same behavior may or may not be adaptive depending on the situation, on the goal, and discerning that well enough to select which behavior is adaptive and to flexibly adjust your behavior as needed is a kind of practical intelligence. Well, it's prudence, which is also a virtue. A weakness of positive psychology is that it reifies, it takes out of context and treats as factual as or objective particular traits, behaviors, and states as positive, inherently positive, in a way that removes the role of social context and construction that's necessary to identify something as good. Virtues are valued if, when, and because they represent socially adaptive behaviors. In theory, they allow us to build a good life for ourselves and for others. Virtues are social constructs. They emerge through relationship and dialogue. It's when you laugh that my sense of humor becomes a virtue. To sin, hamartia in ancient Greek, is an archery term meaning to miss the mark, to fall short. If I hurt you with a cruel joke, I have a vice, not because I don't have a sense of humor, but because I have applied it to ill purpose. My deceit is not a vice when the axe murderer asks me where you're hiding. The construct of virtue assumes that one's action should serve a social good higher than oneself. Assessing that requires some standard, some reference point that's external to the action itself, and even to the goal of the action. How do you know that was a good goal? Acting virtuously in accordance with that standard satisfies a need for meaning and purpose. Indicating virtue through words or performances that fall short of real action as a pretense to impress people is therefore a corruption. It's called virtue signaling. Sometimes people want to know where they're going, as if that was predestined. It doesn't really work like that. If there's any destination, it's right in front of you, and it's continuously revealed as you make vocational choices. You can find a place of vocation from moment to moment, and that's a place of service where your strengths, be they moral or physical or mental, serve some higher good, maybe the needs of your community. Career is a journey, and you can only see the whole path and where it got to at the end. And that's not for you to know, at least not now. Your path is emerging as you navigate vocational choice points according to your values in ways that apply your gifts, in ways that express your interests and your personality. But you can never see very far ahead. You can, like a car that's driving in the night with the headlights on, you can only see a few feet in front of you. And that's okay. You just need to know how to make the right turns. That's the matter of discernment. Intuitively, you already know how to find your way. Like looking up to your values and using them like a compass to discern at each moment, in each situation and context, how you can best put your talents to service with your next action, applying your virtues and managing your vices. That's the best anyone can do. But sometimes we need a little help. Discernment, which is about making the right vocational choice requires self-awareness and reflection, but it also has to be done in community because we need others to act as a check on our own self-deception or short-sightedness. We all have a limited perspective. We all have weaknesses and vices. We can find wisdom and strength outside of ourselves. Our talents are socially valued, and if we would pretend to serve anyone, then it behooves us to consult them and hear what they think of what we're doing. It would be arrogant not to do so. Now for the horse. Self-efficacy, which you'll recall refers to your sense of competence in performing a task, is like your horsepower. Self-efficacy is your belief in your capacity to act in the ways that are necessary to reach a specific goal. And it can be legitimately high or low. It should be high for your talents. But if you aren't good at something, and that's okay, we're all not good at very many things, you need to know that so that you can learn it or delegate the task for someone else to do. We can look at your traits as if you're average on this and above average on that and below average on this other thing. And you could measure yourself up to some ideal and feel like a failure if you're not above average on everything or on some idolized trait like intelligence. We could come up with a test, like the IQ test, and use it to decide who should be in charge and who gets to be institutionalized, sterilized, euthanized, or worse. We've actually done that. Another way to go about things is to imagine that you, with your traits and your strengths and your weaknesses and your traumas, with all the faculties of your conscious mind and the powers of your intuition, with all the resources you have inside and outside of yourself, might in fact be wonderfully made in order to go do something. What is that thing is a question of vocation. The role of psychological tests and measures are, at their best, tools that should be used to support you in achieving that. Through education, training, and appropriate placement. Unfortunately, we've often used psychological measures for the purposes of exclusion rather than inclusion. Psyche is often depicted with the wings of a butterfly. Psyche is the ancient Greek word for soul, and also for the word butterfly. Butterflies represent hope and transformation. Think of all the trials that a caterpillar has to go through in order to become a butterfly. It stops eating, it becomes bound and trapped inside a cocoon, it hangs upside down, it gruesomely digests itself before finally re-emerging into the world on shaky legs. And you too will, as a consequence of navigating all the ways that you're tested, find your wings. The story of Psyche is a story of a young woman's journey, that is, of the soul's passage from unconscious innocence to conscious wisdom through a process of loss, trials, tribulations. Her redemption is found in that she's living earnestly and trying to do the right thing, but since she's human, she never stops running into trouble or making mistakes. She goes astray, but she remains faithful to her ideals, to her values, and that's why she can pick herself up and keep going. There is a developmental role of trials and suffering in individuation, in becoming fully yourself, of self-actualizing, which relies on integrating all the parts of yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, your positive and negative emotions, your hopes and your traumas, towards being in the world in the most powerful way. If you then find some pleasure in that, then you've integrated all three kinds of well-being: eudaimonic, utilitarian, and hedonic. Incidentally, there's a butterfly called the Psyche butterfly, It's small and white and very plain looking, and they fly low over the grass, and they rarely leave ground level. May you find your wings and stay grounded. And next time, as you walk along your path and you see a little white butterfly flutter by, remember this. Take care and see you next week.